Hey, good afternoon. I hope you're having a good Erev Shabbos on this glorious day, the last Facebook Live of the year, as we get ready for the last Shabbos of 2022. May God bless each and every one of you that you utilize this last Shabbos for positive to speak. Are we able to speak to those we disagree with? Are we able to have conversations? And even if we disagree, and even if we won't support someone, have a discussion. And what made me think about is this week, 300 rabbis, conservative reform rabbis, wrote a letter to the incoming government in Israel that they're not welcome in their shuls, they're not welcome in their temples. Since they disagree with what they're doing, they will not allow them to speak in any of their congregations or have anything to do with them. And this has been a recurring theme. In fact, when Yair Lapid left his office for the last time, he refused to shake hands with Bibi Netanyahu. And this happened in this country and in other countries. And, it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to think differently, to act differently. It's actually okay not to support someone that you disagree with or you think is harming your interests. But not to have a dialogue, to tell someone that you're not welcome in my temple. I thought about this a lot because I remember when the famous Goldstone report, where this Jewish South African guy helped write this terrible report about Israel, which was untrue. And we had this whole debate. If he came to our shul, someone who literally harmed Israel, would we let him in? And the truth is that we had this conversation, and I told the guys around me, I said, to be honest, I have a hard time telling you that I would not let anyone in. A shul is a place of God, of spirituality, of dialogue, even when you disagree. So I wanted to connect it to this week's Torah portion. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments in a positive and a constructive way, if you agree with me or not, but not in a destructive way. So in this week's Torah portion, we read about one of the most emotional parts of the Genesis or the whole Bible, where Judah and Joseph and Judah fight over Benjamin. And eventually, Joseph is so emotional because he realizes that Judah is ready to give up his life for his brother, which they didn't do for Joseph. In fact, they did the opposite. They sold him into slavery. And finally, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. It's an emotional. If you haven't read it, you should read it. And if you haven't read it again, you should read it again. There's the old anecdote of the woman who comes to shul and she reads a story about Joseph being sold to his brothers, and she's crying and sobbing. She feels terrible for Joseph. And then, when she sees this, she's crying again when they come back together. And the next year she comes to shul and she's not crying. So the people ask her, why didn't you cry this year? And she laughed and she said, she didn't understand. She said, listen, if Joseph's brothers didn't like him and they hated him, and he knew it already, why the heck did he go again? To her, she relived it every week. But the bottom line is like this. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and they hug and they kiss. And then it says in the verse, and they spoke one to another. And the question, of course, that could be asked is, all right, it's emotional. The brothers spoke. The brothers kissed, they hugged, they embraced. They haven't seen each other in 20 years. They reconciled. But what does he have to tell us afterwards? They spoke to each other? Big deal. Yeah, like yippee hooray. Fine, if they kissed and they hugged, they spoke. What's the message that the Torah is sending us here? There's got to be a message. And I saw a very simple but very profound thought on this, which I think speaks to this idea. If you go back to the portion of Vayeshev when the brothers sell Joseph, the Torah tells us that the brothers despised Joseph. They couldn't speak to him. They couldn't speak to him peacefully. Basically, say the rabbis, the beginning of the problem wasn't that they had disagreements. The beginning of the problem wasn't that Joseph thought one way, that you should be out there in the world and engaged in the world, and the brothers wanted to be shepherds, they wanted to be inward. The biggest problem was that they couldn't speak to each other. They had no dialogue. They told Joseph, we're not letting you into our shul. You can't come in. You can't speak to us. You can't be part of our community. That was the crux of the problem, which is happening again today. And that's why in Parshas Vayigash, when the brothers come back together, after they hug, they kissed. What does the verse tell us? They spoke one to another. The bottom line of all of it of the reconciliation was that they were able to speak, they were able to have dialogue, they were able to connect, they were able to respect each other, they were able to love each other, even if they disagreed still, even if they had differences of opinions, even if they thought that their idea was the right one and their brother's wasn't, and maybe their brother was hurting or vice versa, they were able to speak to each other. And that's why after the verse tells us they hugged and they kissed, the verse tells us they spoke to each other. Because back in my yeshiv, that's the crux of the problem, when you can't speak to each other. So my friends, should you support a government, should you not? How you should vote, what your opinion should be, I'm not going to tell you. That's for you to decide. But if one Jew can't speak to another, if one American can't speak to another, if we tell our friends, our brothers, our sisters, that you're not welcome in our shuls, that you're not welcome in our communities, what kind of message are we sending? We speak about tolerance, but do we only have tolerance when someone thinks and acts like us? What's true tolerance? So my wish, as we end this 2022 and we get ready to begin 2023, my wish to each and every one of you is that you should love, you should be kind, you should have dialogue, you should speak, you should listen, not just speak, you should listen to others. And the way to find truth is by engaging and discussing and having tolerance. Shabbat Shalom. Love and peace to all my brothers and sisters. May you usher in a year, a secular year of health and happiness to each and every one of you. Shabbat Shalom.